Bol. It's our fifth session. And my name is Regitze Hess, and I am your moderator for today. And I come from the IFHP. I'd like to here and now also recognize that we can only make this happen through our sponsorships, and our primary sponsorships are BPD in the Netherlands and BBU in Berlin. So, of course, thank you to them. Today, our learning lab is focusing on changing demographics, urban migration and governance, and we have a lineup of three presentations. First, Dr. Hakim, then Hanna Rudner, and then Yvonne Franz. So for sake of transparency, again, please be informed that Dr. Hakim's presentation is a recording because at last minute he couldn't be with us in person today. And then Hanna will be present and in person, and then Yvonne Franz will join us and be present and in person online. So we will have this online presentation, digital recording from Dr. Hakim, but we won't be able to offer Q&A with Dr. Hakim, but Hanna and Yvonne will be available for questions and dialogues, and we very much welcome questions and dialogues from Hanna with Hanna Rudner and Yvonne Franz. On the subject of migration and changing demographics, when I started working with IFHP, some of the main things that we were discussing was the mega challenges that face us on an international level. IFHP is an international forum focusing on housing and planning, where Deltametropool is a regional forum. So we are on two different scales of, let's say, our horizons, but local things are important on an international level. Regional things are important on an international forum, and international movements and trends and tendencies impact us on a local, national, and regional scale. And this, when first working with IFHP, we were talking about the mega trends at that time that were really challenging housing and planning. And the three ones we talked about when I started, and it was around starting my career with IFHP, was the mega trends of population growth worldwide and then demographic shifts. There was the one thing, the demographic shifts from the rural to the urban, but there's certainly also demographic shifts around the world. And the third one was the growth in GDP. My question would be, what do we see as challenges as in our current time now? Maybe in recent decade, we talk about how the world has become very digital. We've also been in an era where we've talked about climate change, but I think we should think about what are the trends that are pervasive worldwide but affect us locally. I'd also like to point out is migration is a question of flux, moving back and forth. And it's not only people, but now we can talk about the circulation of the monies that people send around the world, or the goods that people send around the world. Maybe we talk a lot about monetary things, but what we really need to understand is who is moving around the world, why we're moving around the world, and what are our needs. And I think these three things will be addressed in our different presentations. So this is a very short framing on my part. The first presentation by Dr. Hakim will take us away from Europe and give us some perspectives in another area of the world. But Europe, where we are, Deltametropool is located in the Netherlands and the IFHP has its base in Copenhagen. We can be Eurocentric, but that's not the point. We need to think always worldwide. If we're in Europe, if we're in Asia, if we're in North America, South America, the Pacific, even Greenland now everyone's talking about, but I won't go down that path. Please, I'd like to ask my colleague Eva to share the recording of Dr. Hakim, who is a professor of architecture in Bangladesh, specializing in informal settlements, rural and urban migration, climate resilient housing. But let's listen to his recording rather than my introduction.
Hi, I'm Hakim, an academic from Khulna University, Bangladesh. I will shed light on how refugee camps, socio-spatial environment affect refugees' integration to the host environment. Considering this learning labs interest in the challenges of sustainable and socially equitable spatial development planning and housing, I hope my presentation would make sense, especially in the humanitarian European context, which has been dealing with immigrants, refugees, and struggling to sort out whether integration or assimilation is the right path to pursue. I think my topic should be quite relevant to it. This is based on a 2020 article published in the Journal of Immigrant and Refugee Studies. It was co-authored by Abdullah Yvonne and Mohammad Masood Parvez. So let me just introduce you to the Bihari. This is a group of non-Bengali. The Bihari are the subject of this today's topic. Talk. So this is a group of non-Bengali Muslim refugees who experienced triple displacement, and about 0.4 million of them currently live across 116 camps across Bangladesh. To understand the refugee status, we need to understand the geopolitical setting of the Indian subcontinent back in 1947, when Pakistan was split into two parts, East and West. The East part is later became Bangladesh through a bloody war with Pakistan. The Bihari were initially displaced from the present-day India and the state of Bihar, and then they moved to East Pakistan, as you can see, during the 1947 partition of the Indian subcontinent. Because they're Muslims, they came to the Muslim majority, the nearest Muslim majority part of Pakistan. However, it was driven by communal rights on the Indian side. The Bihari are an Urdu-speaking population. They openly sided with the quasi-military regime of Pakistan in the post-independence political conflict between East Pakistan, the Bengali, and the West Pakistan rulers. It spanned from 1947 to 1971. And during the 71 war, they sided with the Pakistan. And when the Bengali won the war, the liberation war from Pakistan, they became state enemies. And with the support from International Red Cross and UNHCR, the Bihari were temporarily rehabilitated in open playgrounds in a planned township called Khalishpur. So this is, you can see, Bangladesh and Pakistan. In between is India. So the Bihari were stripped of their citizenship status after they became state enemies, and they got stranded within Bangladesh as Pakistanis. For the rehabilitation, UNHCR adapted could go for either of these three options. However, they opt for integration instead of repatriation, which was not possible because Pakistan never accepted them, acknowledged them as true citizens, and they couldn't have been resettled because they are not Bangladeshi citizens. So they were trapped in this camp. So in recent times, they have been, I think back in 2021, they were granted the Urdu-speaking Bangladeshi status. They were provided national ID cards and rights like a normal Bangladeshi citizen. So they're no longer stranded. However, while the Biharis perform their specific cultural activities within camps, and despite this recognition, many prefer to conceal their Bihari identity and the camp address. So what does this concealment point to? Is it their unmet social integration in the acculturation process? and what role the camps actually played in this. So these are the three camps. These you can see this planned township where they actually, many plots of land they actually owned when they came to Pakistan. Then Pakistan became Bangladesh. They got trapped in these three camps. So they were initially settled in the tents, and then in time they became, matured into more permanent camps, as we see it. So these are the three sites you can see within the planned township of Kalishpur. But presently, these camps resemble a typical Bangladeshi slum with even more density and without opportunities for mobility. But what is a camp theoretically? It's a political construct. It's a place of homocesur, site of mobilization, scarcity, and deprivation of human rights. And it's a stuck life where citizenship and individual right questions are diminished, superseded, or rejected even. And it's also a crucial special formation, and it's also a place of exception. So when you look at Bihari's integration efforts, we look at three areas. One is their cultural maintenance practices, one is their social participation, and another is the exceptionalities of the camp itself. So beginning with cultural maintenance, you can see that they speak Urdu at home. As I said earlier, they also play Urdu songs, ghazals, and qawwalis. They resist. The elder among them, resist that they're sort of, xenophobic toward learning Bangla. There is an overstated Islamic way of life in their special behavior. They consider themselves ardent Muslims, both racially and religiously. And they also have this tendency to celebrate Muharram, which is a Shiite tradition, religious program compared to Eid. But this, and Eid is mainly, performed by the Sunni Muslims, and Muharram is the biggest Muslim of the Shiite. The Biharis are Sunnis themselves, Bengalis are also Sunnis themselves, but then again, the Bihari practice, rituals of the Shiites. And it is a more cheerful and extravagant celebration. And there is also the use of Imambara, the shrine around which the celebration takes place. And there is a Tajia procession, which is very colorful, very eventful, very dramatic, despite being Sunnis. In terms of social participation, the neighbors look at them as, look at these programs as sort of inappropriate and haram in Islamic terms. They also look at it as a mere subculture, and the Biharis carry a negative image in the minds of the Bengalis. They hold the power of the largest vote bank in this neighborhood, but they seldom use it to sort of select their own. I'll describe it later. And despite holding Bangladeshi citizenship, many still dream of going back to Pakistan, which is elusive in every sense. And recent inclination to learn Bangla, we see this among the younger of the Biharis. In terms of exceptionality, Bihari's religious positioning into this, it looks like a third way of Islam between two extremes. There is a strange absence of mosque and prioritization of imambara, as I told earlier. There is political use of permanent imambara, a consciously built ideological element at settlement interface. There is also politics with dirty and ill management of camp facilities compared to their home interiors. There's also strategic and purposeful political presence. They have remained passive in between and invisible mostly, instead of direct political participation, despite having that large vote bank. And Bihari's action demonstrate clear leadership and organization, and very conscious organization. And these are influenced by an overstated and alternative Islamic ideology. They use Islamic belief as a flexible instrument to shield against potential Bengali contestation and antagonism. And the Bihari camp appears as a place of exception. This is created less through the denial of civil rights by the state, and more through Bihari's own acts and conscious acts. Instead of assimilation and novel local integration have been practiced through the ways I just described. So the exceptionality of the camp, that affects the Bihari social integration. And exceptionality emanates from the many social, political, and social special actions. There is no single strategy. Instead, there is a combination of strategies to uphold their culture and identity and secure survival resources. They accommodate compromises, often remain passive, indifferent, and withdrawn, as I said earlier. They violate state law if needed, but to a certain extent, not to the extent that deems them, proves them as criminals. They consciously mismanage and even display acts and events of cultural purity and otherness. And this is the third area of Islam we identified. We termed it as the third way. It becomes apparent, which is neither fundamental nor liberal, but there is a ritual and culture-based middle path, and which is often exaggerated and out of place. And then there's also a lack of initiative from the state, of course, because providing IDs are not enough. More actions, especially with regard to the camps. It's, from the Bangladeshi side, more integration effort is, of course, needed. And the physical, but the problem is that physical spaces of this camp act as an instrument and stage. So they sort of, it becomes a shell which they use for their cultural maintenance purpose. And the integration effort is like very, I would say, very strategic and very slow in that sense. And all the exceptionalities of the camp affect, I would say, their integration, mostly, negatively, some of them positively. So I think I will just stop here. I think my time is up. So more questions. I am recording this message. So if there are questions, you can write it down, and through Eva you can send me. I will try to reply this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for following Dr. Hakim's recording, and as he states in the closing of his recording, that if you have questions, write them down. We'll gather them up. We will. You can put them in the chat, or you can send an email, and we can send them on to Dr. Hakim, and we can invite Dr. Hakim also to future learning labs where we can also have a discussion with him. Oops. What I would like to do now is invite Hanna Rudner to give her presentation, and Hanna works on with Buurthuis De Bol. It's a resident-run, community-claimed center located in a social housing neighborhood in Amsterdam. So we're shifting, let's say, geographies from Bangladesh to Amsterdam, but we're going to be again addressing the who are our citizens. And I would say human settlement is very much defined by the citizens, and the citizens, what is a citizen? It's not only those who have citizen rights, it's those who are in an area where they're in part of a community. So settlement is defined by community. We got some perspectives on community in the context of camps. Now we will get some perspectives on community in the context where Hanna works with community in Amsterdam. So Hanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and it was wonderful to follow the previous lecture. I have a practical question, and I would like to share my presentation, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed. Ava, could you assist?
Hi, Hannah. I'm gonna check that for you now. It should.
Thank you so much.
Um,
And
yeah, with a green button at the bottom of the screen.
yeah. Um, Some technical issues there. The experience of pandemic has taught me nothing. Hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah, it's working.
Yes.
Wonderful. So my name is Hanna Rudner, and I'm going to talk to you about the community studies in the North. And I'm talking from the point of view of someone who is in this organization as one of the contributors rather than the external researcher. And the way I structured the presentation today is that I'm going to first introduce you to this place through the people who work there and who negotiated it into being, and therefore kind of give you a glimpse on what this place means in the neighborhood. And then I'm going to explain that process of how it was negotiated in the being through institutional support, and how this, as such, I see as an example of kind of public commons collaboration. And then eventually I'll delve into the continuous learning that we are experiencing with governance, specifically on decision making, on conflict, and on power. And finally, I'm going to reflect on this type of work as a craft. So something that I argue is that you learn intentionally and that you can get better at. So yeah, this is my team. These are people that I'm constantly inspired by every day. And the reason I'm stretching it like this is because I want you to look at this place not just as a place, but a sum of parts. And then understanding what the origin story is behind all these people gives you a better sort of idea on the authenticity of the intentions and therefore the role in the neighborhood. So on the left here, we have Mo. Mo always, when introducing this Buurthuis De Bol, he tells the story of how when he was young and he grew up in the neighborhood, he used to always hang out with his mates drinking energy drinks and always thinking that adults saw them as a nuisance. And then later on, he sort of realized that this was because, well, actually there was no place for them to go, for young people to go in the neighborhood. So now what he does is that he runs youth projects such as pizza making workshops or theater workshops to get kids to kind of get inspired and get involved and be off the streets. And he's also someone who is really good at hustling, and he can hustle a cooking workshop or course, but also a meeting with an elderman, which is often handy. And on the right here, we have Abdeslam, and he's lived in the Kleine Wereld neighborhood for almost 40 years. And he started here a kickboxing gym, offering very low-cost training for children, women, youth, and people with specific health issues. And especially his women-only groups are very popular among Muslim women for whom privacy and cultural respect are very important when it comes to doing sports. And next to that, he also organizes fellow tenants in the social housing to speak out about mold problems and poor conditions of the housing in the neighborhood. And I haven't mentioned this, but I'm a photographer, so all of the images that you're seeing, I'm trying to tell the story through the photos that I've been making in the last period. Then on the left, we have Shafika, and she first got involved as a volunteer out of passion to strengthen this relatively poor neighborhood. And she now at the Bol runs homework clubs for children and reading clubs, and also a hugely appreciated quarterly ladies' nights. And she's also someone from the neighborhood that people can turn for help with sensitive issues. So especially people who maybe don't speak the language, they can approach her, and then she helps to guide them to the right place of support. Then we have Fatima. She's the board chair of our foundation. And she grew up in the largest family in the Netherlands, affected by the Dutch childcare benefit scandal. So it was this huge thing where a lot of people were receiving benefits, and then it transpired that it was wrong, and then they were told to pay a lot of money back, but that was wrong. So huge amount of people, often people with migration backgrounds, got into debt, and the repercussions of this scandal are painful for these families. So now, with the support of De Bol, Fatima founded her own foundation to support affected families in De Bol, and she became an influential voice in the city in general on themes of social justice, and she's just a hugely inspiring powerhouse. Then we have Floris. He used to, for years, run art and theatre kids for activity for kids. And then eventually he moved to the neighborhood himself. And now he runs a technical lab where he teaches 3D printing and woodworking classes. And then on the right, we have Dima. And together we are running a catering cooperative to provide affordable meals in the neighborhood, and also to get more people into work through the principles of community work building. And yeah, Dima comes from Jordan, and for 17 years she's been volunteering, running cooking initiatives and working with newcomers. And now she's taken a step to start a business, which is and we also have Gabriela. This is a mural that she painted in the neighborhood. She first joined us as a part-time sort of social media person, and then she grew to be a self-sufficient mural artist and a ceramist. And she's very open about being neurodivergent, and she kind of channels that perspective into her work. And we also have a wonderful group of volunteers who show up every day, making sure that our doors are open for the visitors and for the neighborhoods. And we have people who don't actually live in the neighborhoods. And this is on the left, we have Miro. So she's a community worker who, together with Mo, the resident, they lobbied to set this place up in the first place. And she's a very inspiring, politically and culturally engaged activist who kind of holds this whole thing together. And we have Peter, our money man, who spent his career in kind of prestigious art organizations and cultural boards. And now at a social rate, he brings his calm and experience to handle our finances. And well, I'm the last one. I'm originally an architect, and I was simply drawn to this place because I saw a determination from local residents to negotiate a place into being. And I run programs, I document our work photography, and I co-lead the catering cooperative with Dima. And where is this happening? So our context is the Kleine Wereld, which is a social housing neighborhood in Amsterdam North. And it's one of the neighborhoods that the city of Amsterdam describes as ontwikkelbuurten. So these are areas which need long-term investment to tackle social, economic, and physical challenges. 30% of households live on minimum income, the highest in this area. 13% rely on welfare. Half of the people have low-level education. And there are also other issues such as poor health, limited opportunities for youth, and criminality. And then 76% of the residents have migration background. And they mainly come from Morocco, Turkey, and Suriname. And this is basically a legacy of post-war labor migration and allocation of social housing. And what has happened is that many years ago, Esther Lagendijk, so this lady in a printed suit on the right, she's the district executive of Amsterdam North. She gave a speech, and she said that there will be bricks and there will be mortar, and that a community center will come to the Kleine Wereld. So this is a neighborhood where basically there's nothing to do for residents, and she kind of made that promise. But little has happened. So then, I think in around about 2022, Miro, the neighborhood worker, and Mo, the active resident, basically wrote to her and said, well, how about this community center that you promised? And what followed was a beautiful and rare moment of institutional alignment, because somehow the municipality came and ended up paying rent on an empty, privately owned former sports school. And a group of residents were given the keys, and not just to the building, but to the possibility of shaping it together. And I really see this as a kind of public commons collaboration, where a public body is supporting and enabling self-organization by residents who know best how to reach vulnerable groups in the neighborhoods and how to respond to their needs. And this is effectively representing the public interest of care for residents. And from the start, well, first of all, we just wanted to have an accessible place for meeting. But then the second thing is that we wanted to do something about the root of what we see, the issue in the neighborhood, and that is poverty. So these are different photographs that I've taken at different times of the day, which shows you how we use the space for different community events and for clubs. But next to that, we really focus on trying to create jobs and support people to move out of welfare using the principles of community wealth building. And as such, we are setting up 2 cooperative businesses with the residents, one specializing in catering and one specializing in cleaning. And this is all very nice, but what happens when you bring these different people who have different cultures, different education levels, different incomes, they are of different age and have different language backgrounds, and then you say, oh, we're going to run a non-hierarchical organization, it's very challenging. It's really not easy to find each other. So I think this is one of the most important things that I've learned in this past time learning about governance. And that's the dynamic between the understream and overstream. So overstream is everything that's surface level. So this is like the visible, the formal, the rational. This is things like the work that we have to do, the roles, the responsibilities, our goals, our plans, our possibilities, our policies. And then we have also underneath of that, the understream. And that is the intangible, the emotional, and the humane. So this includes feelings, fears, trust, and the unspoken rules, the unspoken words, and the unspoken assumptions. And together, I see these things as backdrop for our organization and for our governance. And then the governance, which I see as decision-making, conflict resolution, and power, play constantly across these two levels. So firstly, to structure our overstream, so this is the formal, this is the work, the roles, responsibilities. We've implemented a governance form called holacracy. And this is where instead of having one manager directing everyone, our core team of 8 people each has clearly defined roles and responsibilities. And within these roles, people have autonomy to act to the best of their ability. So you are given a certain area of responsibility, and you can do whatever you want, given that this is for our shared purpose and the others trust you to do that. So we hold 2 types of structured meetings. One of them is about the day-to-day happenings. So this is working in our organizations. And the other one is about designing how do we work together. So this is working on our organization. And in this meeting, we use something called integrative decision-making to make new roles, to reassign responsibilities, to hold each other accountable, and to try to respond dynamically to the changes that come up. So effectively, each person is seen as a sensor. And if you notice a problem or a missed opportunity, you're expected to bring this up, and then we can shape together how we respond. So it's less about managing others and more about creating a system where everyone can lead within their own role. Basically, it's about letting go of centralized control, embracing trust in each other, and it's a way for us to be efficient and to be pragmatic. But then in the understream, what we often have, and we see this a lot, is conflict. And conflict is a very interesting sort of moment where we have an element of danger, but we also have an element of an opportunity because the outcome is not open, is still open. And conflicts, well, they can spiral into disasters beyond repair, but they can also lead to recovery and transformation. But this is completely depending on how this conflict is being handled. And oh my goodness, we encounter this a lot. And this basically happens when our needs are not being met. And these are needs like safety. So for example, when people express feelings through raised voices or sort of gestures, this could be deeply distressing for the others who are in the room, especially for those who have a history of domestic abuse. We have needs like autonomy. So when we have people who are experienced in formal institutions, they may bring certain expectations about quality and processes for the work that we do, which doesn't always match the kind of more street smart working experience. So then clashes arise. We have the need of connection, differences in communication styles. For example, depending on cultural background, you might be more direct or indirect, and this could lead to misunderstandings, which can be very harmful. We have respect. So, for example, culture of gossiping and how can that make people feel like they've lost face or they're not being taken seriously. And we have a very big topic of money and of dignity. So some people in a core group are being paid wages and others receive volunteer reimbursements. And they would also like to go on holidays. But if you're on benefits, there's restrictions on how much money you can receive. So this leads to frustrations. And what do we do about this? Honestly, it's very hard. And it's especially challenging when you carry when some people carry heavy personal baggage, and this could be experiences such as having a history of sexual violence or having fled a country at war. And sometimes we can't handle this, so we need external mediators, but they cost money, which we don't always have. So I've started studying conflict more seriously through books like Interpersonal Conflict or Nonviolent Communication. And my hope is that what I'm learning, and similarly to how we've learned holacracy, is that I will be able to organize workshops with the team to kind of gradually practice more conscious, empathetic ways of communicating so that we are more resilient and that we don't go down because we can't sort things out internally, which would be a huge shame. And finally, we have the topic of power. And this is probably the most confronting and taboo topic to discuss. Yet I believe this is something that underpins every organization. And this is what really determines whether people have a say and on what. And power is always present. And it's basically the ability to shape outcomes, whether it's for resources, through knowledge, or through relationships. It's never equally distributed, and it often follows the lines of class, culture, education, and experience. And what I'm interested in is what Robert Miesel calls relational power. So this is not power over others, but the capacity to influence one another while remaining open to being influenced in return. So this is different, a slightly shift of saying that we can share power with each other somehow. This is a simple diagram that might not be an accurate diagram, but this is how I felt the power is distributed within our organization. So this kind of gives you an idea. But basically, if we consider it as a triangle, on the top we have our financiers, the municipality, and then we have the board, then we have the core team. So these are the people that I showed you at the beginning with photographs. We have our volunteers, and then eventually at the base we have the residents and the neighborhood and the visitors. And what I find very interesting and rewarding is creating moments and seeing people move through these layers. So for example, some of my colleagues started as residents, then they became volunteers, and then joined the core team. And now they are being paid income and they are off welfare. Two moved from being a resident to being a board member. And then one since has even been invited to judge funding proposals at sort of like district level, meaning they are in shaping decisions and how resources are being allocated at the top. So creating these moments of penetration is very interesting to me. And these might seem like small, but they are significant examples of making this power penetrable. And we hope to work to create real pathways for people to share power. But honestly, it's very slow and it's very not straightforward process, but an ambition. So finally, to wrap this up, I would like to share that I see governance as a craft. So something that you learn, something that you practice, something that takes time, intentionality, and being familiar with the right tools. And we're still figuring out, and now, especially with the support of my mentor, Torrent Konsari, and ongoing research that I'm sort of putting into this, I feel like at least we're becoming clearer about the things that we don't know. And I think something that I've learned is that these things like holacratic governance and conflict resolution, it's not something that emerges naturally or organically. It really requires time investment and knowledge, and also care with each other. So I also noticed that working in more heterogeneous groups, so having a lot of people who have different backgrounds and different ages, it can lead to very rich results. But this also makes it even more challenging to keep harmony, what makes governance even more important. But I do believe that this kind of craft builds resilience in the neighborhoods, and it has a potential to shape how we develop cities. But I would say it would be especially by redistributing power. So this was my presentation, and answer some questions. And should you want to reach out for more questions, I put down my email address here on the last slide. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you for really a lot of food for thought. And now we have the wonderful opportunity to field questions for clarification. I am very curious about where you've developed your thinking, because you're working in the context of Buurthuis De Bol, but you could also be an independent consultant with this very extensive mapping of the craft of governance. So I'm really wondering where you developed it, and then did you develop it in the context of this work, or has it been an ongoing process? But that's the one question for me, but I certainly open the floor to others.
Yeah, so I involved in this project and also in the two different housing cooperatives. But I think for me, what's very important is that when I put myself at work, I'm always in the group, and that allows me to sort of share the vision with people, and then it feels different and it allows me to be properly involved. I avoid situations where I'm being an external sort of like academic or an external consultant, because I feel like these things really take time. And then there is not enough space, this is my personal view, to really do it if you are only there for like an hour a week or something. So it's a conscious position that I take, and I developed my practice around that starting point. And yeah, and I hope to be someone who shares the findings through writing and through photographs with other people. I don't know.
Thank you, Hannah. I'd like to open the floor to more questions. There certainly should be questions coming from the group. I'm trying to see if I can see people. Otherwise, I invite you to unmute and ask your question. Are there any questions?
Nadia, I believe, has a question.
Yes, please.
Yes, Hannah, thank you so much for a very inspiring lecture and giving all your thoughts and your experiences in this organization. What I was wondering, because you said it goes very slow and well, you have to learn by doing. Is there any exchange with other organizations like yours? Because I was thinking of the Wijkpaleis in Rotterdam, which is also kind of organization that self-organizing things within the neighborhood, etc., and has many helpers. And is this something you explore?
Yeah, for sure. So, especially with these ideas about community wealth building, whereby I'm not sure if people are familiar with this concept, but basically it's trying to keep money a bit more locally. So convincing big organizations who are stable in a city or in a neighborhood, so things like schools, police stations, municipality, to choose not to spend their money on things like catering or cleaning or making the green to big private organizations elsewhere, but to say, hey, let's put this money to smaller cooperative residence-run organizations locally. So you can put more money into the local cycle. So we have an alliance of people in Amsterdam North who are very excited about this prospect. Community wealth building is not yet huge, but we kind of have meetings or like group chats, and we invite speakers to kind of see, okay, how we as a whole Amsterdam North could be making this real. And then we also take it upon ourselves to go to other places in the Netherlands, for example, the Afrikanerwijk in Rotterdam, to see what they're up to, because they are doing very interesting things. And yeah, I think with commons, it's especially strong if the small organizations are connected with each other. And then you can kind of leverage more, I think, yeah, more voice if you are a network and not just individuals.
And another question, maybe. Thank you for your answer. If you are empowering people, like in the triangle, from being visitor, a neighbor, and living in neighborhood, and then going into being volunteer, and then in the board, etc., and then you have the municipality funders, does it also work in the other way around, where municipal funders become also visitors and also volunteers in this situation?
Yeah, I think that happens every now and then. There was one guy from the municipality who once helped us set up for a community dinner, so or people who kind of come for lunch or come to hang out. So yeah, I think it does happen to everyone also, but I think it's good to sort of consider that going up is where the being able to control the resources happens. So it's cute if they come down, but eventually the goal is to get more people who are residents to have an actual say, and not the kind of say which is like a reference for someone else to still just make another decision. Do you know what I mean?
I understand you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Thank you very much, Hannah. Please, are there anyone have any other comments, questions? You're very welcome.
I see there's a question in the chat from Urban Green Deals
Yeah.
about where the funding comes from.
So our funding comes from different funds, but predominantly the municipality of Amsterdam. So I think this is basically to do with the fact that we are within the Kleine Wereld, which is considered this type of ontwikkelbuurt. So there is a policy choice to put more investment in that area. And then depending on the projects that we run, we seek funding from more like cultural funds or funds for youths, or sports funds, these kind of things. However, what we would very much like to see is the cooperative businesses making their own money and then being able to reinvest the money into the social goals of the foundation as a whole. Because the thing about funding is that, especially if you're new in the scene, then you have a couple of years of good funding and then it's over. So part of the resilience is also the financial stability, hoping to diversify our incomes through our own businesses. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Hannah. I can see Ellen Klitter has a question. Please, Ellen Klitter.
Yeah, thank you so much, Regis. Thank you so much, Hannah, Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is more about the upscaling part. So do you see this kind of models being upscaled in Amsterdam itself with the city context, or do you also feel the possibility or see the possibilities that such models can work well in other cities of Netherlands as well? Or what would be the similarities or differences if you think of upscaling, and what would be the ways to it?
Yeah, I'm always curious about this question of upscaling, because I feel like it always comes up. How do we make this bigger? And then I think there's different elements. For example, in my experience with decision making, especially when it's holacratic, the group size can't be bigger than 12 or 15 people, because your meetings stop being efficient and you can't move forward. Of course, there's a solution to that in holacracy. You make circles and then you can make your organization bigger and bigger. But there are certain benefits to keeping things sort of bite size. However, similar to my answer to one of the previous questions, I hope that there will be, and there are so many incredible organizations run by residents healthily, that these organizations are able to govern themselves and self-organize, but then that we can be connected with each other. And that's my idea of being able to upscale. So that it's more like, I'm not sure if federation is the right word.
Yeah.
But maybe like that. But to be perfectly honest with you, I have so much on my plate managing something this small, that I'm not thinking so much about going bigger, but going longer, you know? And further, with the community world building, our hope is to be able to become, it's a very fancy word, incubator, for further cooperatives. But at this point in time, in all honesty, we don't have the in-house knowledge to be able to like lead someone else. We're still trying with these small businesses to figure out our administration and how we get our assignments in and this kind of stuff. And when we do it for these two first ones, maybe we can have another one.
Yeah.
But then the Afrikaner Wijk in Rotterdam is a very good example of someone who has upscaled. And another question of upscaling that still remains a question mark is how can you make like a really good neighborhood assemblies and get like voices about what this community center does and the development of the neighborhood. We are in a building which is privately owned, which is supposedly going to become apartments. So what does that mean? And these kind of things about trying to influence the larger master plan and making spaces for community spaces, that remains still on the agenda.
Maybe just one small question as well. Do you see any kind of differences in the age groups of the people who want to be actively engaging in these conversations, or like, do you see any difference in the demographics in that way, like age group wise?
I think everyone apart from people with families. Basically, these guys often don't have time. And often people who are a bit more like 55 plus have more time, and they also have a lot of opinions about what should happen in the neighborhood. But hopefully, sort of politicizing the younger people, or like not politicizing, but sort of making people a bit more politically conscious for also the programs that we run about things like Gaza and racism and these kind of things. Hopefully will make youths more engaged. And that's also part of our mission, to have people who are able to speak up a little bit more about their needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you to the questions from everyone that have placed questions. We should gradually transition into Yvonne Franz. I'd like to just, on the word of what it should be called, IFHP is a federation. Federation has its roots in other kinds of governance. I think we should remember the Dutch word network. So we think of the worldwide internet, but it really comes off of the Dutch word, and everyone probably knows this, but it really comes from the word, comes off of lace making. So, and how much lace making and the filigree of it can vary. But I think a network is a beautiful thing because there are places where things tie together in nodes, and all the nodes are interconnected. So I would strongly advise, Hannah, to keep on in this line so you don't become too hierarchical. That's my personal view.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. Indeed, a network of nodes.
So with this, I can see that we can now invite our third presentation, and this is by Yvonne Franz. Hello, Yvonne, you're here. And Yvonne and I actually have had the pleasure of each other's company in Vienna several times, where I've visited Vienna. And Yvonne is an urban geographer and senior lecturer at the University of Vienna. And while she's based in Vienna, her research goes across boundaries, across neighborhoods, across peoples, across places, and across countries. And we now have the pleasure of Yvonne of sharing with us her perspectives on people's, places, migration, the impacts that this has. So Yvonne, I would like to give you the floor. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, Regitze. Nice to see you all, and also nice to see a few familiar names in the participant list. It's a great pleasure, and to speak about the changing demographics and its impact on migration and governance in this knowledgeable round of experts. So I'd like to share a few slides with you. If you can just give me a sign if you see my slides now. Oh, no, I reactivated everything. Sorry, it happens sometimes. Let me see now. They should be back. Okay, perfect. And even in larger size. So when we quickly exchanged ideas on what I could contribute for your discussion lab today, I was wondering whether research I'm doing with my colleagues Byung-Sung An and Yurika Sepov right now at the sociology department might be a helpful lens to think about how we can learn from each other, and also where we can be quite open, straightforward, and also, let's say, honest, where we are maybe also not doing a too well job, so to say, in handling multiple challenges that accumulate in cities. And what I would like to share with you today is the relation between migration and especially migration to a growing city and its impact on different levels at the individual, on the individual perspective, namely housing at the first place, but also education, labor, and social participation. So I put emphasis on the housing and the participation part, as this is a knowledge that I can share with you from an ongoing research project. To provide you some context very briefly, so you have to keep in mind if you have never had the chance, like Regitze, to come and see Vienna in the past years, it's still a growing city. So it's one of the cities in Europe that is growing the fastest due to in-migration. So that brings a lot of potential in the sense of what is possible in a growth paradigm, but it also brings a lot of challenges, especially in the phase that we now seem to call a phase that is shaped by multiple crises, the so-called polycrisis. And migration is in this context sometimes or very often referred to as being as one of the key challenges, and not so often as being one of the, let's say, potentials that we have in our city to build on. So keep in mind, the city is not growing because of our very vital birth rate, as you can see here in the infographics. The city of Vienna is growing due to migration, and migration includes migration from other provinces in Austria. So this is still a very strong driver, and you can keep in mind young people moving to Vienna because they want to come here for studying. So they move to Vienna for the university. They also come to Vienna for their first education, like apprenticeship and so on. But we also have a lot of international migration, and here we have to differentiate between European migration and also migration related to forced migration. And all that comes together in a city like Vienna, and not only recently. And this graph, even if we did not update, is just to highlight that sometimes in the narratives we forget about the history and the historical trajectory of cities. And if we look at the history of Vienna, and I'm not an Austrian citizen, so to me this history of Vienna is really not only overwhelming, but it's also explaining so much why certain, let's say, policy changes are coming and disappearing every once in a while. And this graph is showing to you that the population growth is not a constant, let's say, number of people. It's a up and down. And in the context of Vienna, it's a continuous up and down. And the ups and downs can be explained usually through crisis. And if we look at the most recent crisis, like and I don't really like to use the word crisis because it always gives a negative tension to it. But one peak in population growth, one recent peak you see in 2015, and I don't have to explain to you guys in the Netherlands because you have probably the same numbers or similar pictures for Amsterdam, that this is the year of the long summer of migration, where cities in Europe received a lot of forced migrants from countries like Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, and others. Then we have to mention a crisis called the pandemic that kind of disrupted everything that we thought that we can project in terms of population growth. So 2020, borders closed, but also people being very, very skeptical and very also not able to migrate in many cases. And now I can tell you that we can add other events since then, unfortunately, geopolitical events like the war in the Ukraine, that is also bringing again quite a lot of number of new cities or new residents to Vienna. So we speak about 100,000 mostly female migrants from the Ukraine with children or elderly people, but elderly really in the sense of elderly non-employed people beyond 65 and older. And since a year, the issue and the topic of family reunification. So people who do have the right to stay in the Ukrainian case, but also the positive asylum status in the case of Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, that are now coming into the phase that they can bring their family to Austria. And this brings an additional influx of new residents, and particularly to Vienna, because Vienna is, let's say, the center part of migration, also due to the resources that are available. And let's say the topic of resources is the bridge maker to the claim that I would like to make. Because the access to resources, and housing is one resource, but also education, labor, and being part of a society, is something that we need to differentiate between different groups of migrants. And if you look at the current numbers, both numbers that are visible here in the infographics refer to the country of origin of migrants in Vienna. But you can see in the upper box that the top 5 foreign nationalities are Serbia, Germany, Syria. While if you look at the bottom box, net migration by nationality looks slightly different. So we have positive net migration rates amongst people coming from Syria, Ukraine, and Germany. So in a way, if I put it very short, in a nutshell, you see the old migration patterns, the historically grown migration patterns in the upper box, while you see the newer, the most recent migration patterns in the box in the bottom. And as I am German, so to say, I find myself in both boxes as a privileged migration group, because this is happening for a very long time, and this is the reason why the Germans are still the top number 2 migration group in Vienna. While when we look at the net migration rate, so influx versus outgoing, the Germans are on place 3, but we have more recently the biggest net migration rates amongst people coming from Syria and from the Ukraine. So we are dealing with these, let's say, different demands of different migrant groups at the same time in a more and more let's say, dynamic situation. Year by year, the demands are also changing due to the changing migration patterns. Or to put it more easily, if you are a displaced person arriving to Vienna from Ukraine, you have different demands, but also different access to resources compared to a migrant coming from Syria. And this relates to policies, but also to everyday practices. And this is what I'd like to argue now in my next minutes, that we have to look at these accesses to resources, but also the structural, let's say, possibilities of newcomers to a city when it comes to participate in society. And this also includes if you are allowed to work, so if you are part of the labor force, so to say, or if you are excluded due to policies, and if you have possibilities for education opportunities, and not only the ones that are kind of opposed or required to fulfill, but also the ones that you as a newcomer would like to obtain. And there the resources become very quickly very limited. And this brings me to my example that I will make with society and social participation. But first, as you are all very knowledgeable on housing and probably also interested in housing, a quick, really just a short glimpse on the situation for housing of migrants. First, let's say message, there is no particular housing segment directed to migrants, or in other words, there is no housing policy for migrants. And this figure shows you the general distribution of housing tenure across the city. And you already see by the colors that the city, of course, is very proud of its achievements of the social housing story called Red Vienna. And the red parts, especially the dark red part here in the figure, is hinting at the 24% of all people in Vienna who live in public housing that is owned by the municipality. And the other part of social housing is you can find in the, let's say, gray shade box, which is housing cooperatives. And this also includes non-for-profit housing. Or housing provided by non-for-profit associations. And then the story becomes a little bit tricky, because in every housing market you find as well social, but also private, even the private rental and owner-occupied, and in the other segment. But the let's say the main message is the city still, or in the city, there is still a quarter that lives in public housing, which means you have an unlimited rent contract and a rental apartment at a very affordable price. And the other part of the social housing, the one with non-for-profit housing cooperatives, is also rental, but can also be a right to buy an ownership version in 15 years or after 15 years. It's still very affordable, and you also have unlimited rent contracts. And I'm stressing the point of unlimited rent contracts because this is definitely not the case in the private rental segment, that, as you can see, is the biggest share where people in Vienna live. So what we have currently, the current situation is that most tenures in Vienna in the private housing segment do have a limited rent contract, and that means after 4 years, the rent contract either becomes renewed, but with the let's say update, also the rents are increasing according to the inflation rate and other possibilities that are able to be included, or you're not lucky enough and your rent contract will not be updated and renewed, and you have to find another place. And this is a constant, let's say, psychological struggle for many households in Vienna, that you're constantly on search or in search for new housing. So you know that you're safe for 2 years, but already in year number 3, you are starting to search for a new apartment. And this is of particular relevance with very vulnerable households that do not have financial means to kind of rent any apartment in the city, and also households who do not have capacities language-wise, but also a knowledge on rights and possibilities when it comes to, let's say, more social-oriented resources. And this is what we need to keep in mind, because on the one hand side, we always think about migrants and especially migrants with more vulnerable characteristics should be able to live in social housing. And I can tell you it's not possible, because social housing has specific requirements, like a 2 years main residency at one residence before you can even apply for social housing, which also means that most households that are facing the highest levels of vulnerability are usually in the private housing segment. And here you either have the regulated private housing market that is rent regulated, as you see here in the middle part of this figure, but that becomes more and more, let's say, limited in terms of rent duration. So my example with the 4 years, and then you have to find a new apartment, or you find an apartment in the right side of the unregulated market in the private housing segment, any building after 1945. So it can still be quite an old building, but it's not considered to be really historically old. But there you don't have any rent regulation, and there you find the highest, let's say, prices per square meter across the city. So for housing, and when we speak about housing, really becomes precarious for those who do not have a permanent perspective, so to say. And this is what we played with in a group of very kind researchers with colleagues from Leipzig, Riga, Lund, and Vienna, when we looked at the permanent regime of temporary solutions. So what we could identify in our research is that if once you are in this precarious situation, arriving to a new city or in a new country where you're still not in a permanent, stable, individual situation, that also your housing story becomes a story of temporary solutions. And one example that I can share with you from Vienna, and the others you can read in the paper on Lund and Riga and Leipzig. One example is that we have a lot of NGOs jumping in, like NGOs like Caritas or Diakonie or Hilfswerk, so more the charity-oriented NGOs that take up a intermediary role and navigate newcomers in a vulnerable situation on the housing market and many other aspects as well. So these two examples show you that Diakonie and Caritas, they act as a sort of a buddy system. So they have apartments. They rent as Caritas or as Diakonie rental apartments at the rental market at fair prices, fair conditions, adequate housing. And they work as brokers, so to say, and provide these apartments to people that are in immediate need for adequate housing. Again, this is only a temporary solution. So these start apartments or housing management options are usually limited to 3 years. So it's supposed that after 3 years, you are able to find a more permanent situation on the housing market. But it's a very, very important bridging solution that our NGOs are taking up here. But it's maybe surprising that we need something like this in a social housing city like Vienna. And some more examples become obvious when we speak about social participation or being part of society, which comes with language, with spaces of encounters in your community, with possibilities of neighborhood support and so on. And this is something I'd like to share with you because I'm just coming from a meeting and working on that with my colleagues at the sociology department and with Caritas Wien. And it's such a good example for a city like Vienna that always has been based on migration and is now kind of overwhelmed by the different challenges that are coming up. And at the same time, Vienna is, for many, many examples, the poster child or the best practice across Europe. And sometimes you're wondering as a researcher why, because it's a city that also should improve and learn from others. So what we start with when we speak about consequences in a diversifying city is this quote by our colleague Fona and others, who argue that who actually ask what are the actual consequences when outcomes of demographic change when people from a wide range of countries and social backgrounds now live together in urban neighborhoods. So in a way, this quote is already one step further. We assume that our new residents in the city are all accommodated in housing, and they are now members of a community in the neighborhood. And here we see that from a political point of view, the city of Vienna is a very open, very diverse, friendly city, and this needs to be mentioned because Austria as a country is the opposite. So Vienna is an example or an exemption and an example for really pushing forward this diversity narrative, but in a very selective way. And as you know, we still have a social democratic government, and the elections just happened a few weeks ago, and the Social Democrats are again the majority, but they are again in a coalition. So they don't have the complete majority. They are in coalition with the Neos, which is the Liberal Party. And this is a really interesting, let's say, contested area of policy making, because on the one hand side, you have a very, let's say, traditional conservative, but with a strong interest in the public good and the community, with the SPÖ, with the Social Democrats, while the liberals are very much asking, is everything what the city is doing really targeting those who are in need, or isn't there maybe a need for reforms to make social housing, for instance, much more socially targeted and not a program for middle class households? So what the city is right now trying to, let's say, defend is that they are still a place of vivid democracy, although the city is diversifying a lot due to migration, as I just showed you through the numbers. And with this comes your right to be part of the electorate or not. Or to give you an example, if you are an European migrant, you have the right to vote at the district level, which is so to say your neighborhood or community, but you're not allowed to vote for the mayor, because the city of Vienna is a city but a province at the same time. So this level is kind of deleted for newcomers. And you are also not allowed to participate in the national elections, which is similar to other countries in Europe. But you are again allowed to vote for the Austrian candidates at the European elections. And this causes a lot of troubles, because we have districts, and the map here on this slide is not showing you the electorate, but the most, let's say, heat vulnerable districts. But you can basically also say the more red the areas of the city are colored, the less people are actually part of the electorate. So you can say the most diverse neighborhoods or districts, so the old ones with the old housing stock, they are also the ones with the highest levels of migration, which means with the lowest levels of participation in democratic elections. And this is really, really problematic, and especially in a phase where we have to defend democratic values, so to say, but also in a situation where we are rebuilding our cities, in the sense of that we try to make them ready for the ecological changes that are already impacting the city when it comes to climate crisis and livability in a, let's say, overheated city, but temperature-wise and weather-wise, not social-wise. And I like to give you, for the remaining 2 minutes, just a quick example how the city tries to deal with this, let's say, dichotomy, shrinking electorate, but higher need for representation of diverse perspectives. It is through participation. What a surprise. So participation as a tool, and I just heard the question of Hanna asking for really good assemblies. I would say Vienna is also still in search for good, let's say, examples how to make assemblies or participation processes representative. And I give you an example why. So the city is generally committing herself as a city that values participation, and there's a clear participatory turn in the city government. I'm not saying this uncritically, because right now there's already an overemphasis on participation, which leads more to a critical reflection, like Eric Swingedo and others are calling it the right to not participate, because in some cases the city just has the sovereignty to do it and don't need to ask people if they would like to have a new tree in front of the building. However, what we can see, and this is also the reason why we started this research project, migrants, and especially migrants from underrepresented groups, mostly forced migrants, so refugees, but also migrants with very, very little capacities when it comes to resources like language, time, knowledge on the possibility, they are not included in participation processes still. Why? One of the reasons is that the city is still not convinced to offer multilingual participation processes. German comes first. This is also the case in Vienna, and this produces a lot of barriers. On the other hand, the city is contributing with a lot of other programs, let's say possibility for migrant representative groups to be present, but as we might know it from cities like Berlin, we don't have any migrant self-organization networks that really push forward the agenda of specific migrant groups. I'm skipping that part because I'm running out of time. And I just show you this one at the end. This is the reason why we as a research team together with Caritas, we accompany right now a citywide participation project called Wiener Klimateam, Viennese Climate Team. It's a participatory budgeting program that is happening in 3 districts each year, but it's a citywide program, so every district will get one of these Wiener Klimateams in the future, and they ask the residents what to improve in public space in order to become more resilient in times of climate crisis. And the citizens jury is judging on the examples or suggestions. There are several rounds, and even the final round is with the municipality, and then the let's say the suggestion that gains the highest votes will be implemented. We already accompanied one of these rounds in one district, and we added the perspective particularly of homeless people with migrant background, so people who have at various levels high barriers to participate because they are homeless. And they are not considered as being citizens because they don't have residency, and they don't speak the German language because they are either from Hungary and commuting homeless people from the nearby border, or they are from Bulgaria, Serbia, and other countries, but these are the 3 biggest countries of origin. And together with formerly homeless people, this is the picture you see in the end, we work together on ideas that would be helpful, but also improving the public space for everybody. And this is my, let's say, my final takeaway message, to integrate more perspectives, like the perspective of homeless people with non-German language skills, produces better results for everybody. Our suggestions for more inclusive parks and more inclusive streets. If you look at the suggestions like being open 24 hours or providing free Wi-Fi spots everywhere, or shower buses, or protection against sun, or SOS pillars, they all benefit everybody in the city. So it's not that you're kind of planning for a specific target group and their needs are not, let's say, relevant for others. No, it's the contrary. And we started to present these results to the city government, and they were really surprised because they answered literally, I'm quoting, "This helps us to fight for something we know that it's correct to do, but we have not had the evidence so far." So it is worthwhile to go this extra mile and to include more perspectives. And there's a lot of work to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much to Yvonne. I would like to take a few moments. We've gone a little bit over time, but I would like to open the floor to any questions to Yvonne. Please, if there are any questions or comments to Yvonne's presentation. Yes, I can see a hand. Is it Nadia? Please. No question.
It was the applauding hands. Thank you very
It's
much.
the applauding hands. The applauding hands.
Thank you. I had to rush. I'm really sorry because the time limitation. But I hope you find anchor points. Regitze, do you think it fits to what you discussed before?
Yes, it's fantastic. I would actually love to take another session at a later point where we talk more about processes of governance and the access to governance. And I think you've given new meaning to the word Red Vienna. I didn't think about it in this sense before. And I would say that I have also been noticing Vienna profiled even more as the poster child for, let's say, affordable housing. But the question is, for who? And we even see the UN profiling Vienna. But the UN Habitat, and many other agencies of the UN, they're also trying to address the people that do not have rights. And this was this is a point I know from our previous interaction, but to see that this is being addressed on the mapping of and engaging with the homeless. But Yvonne and Hanna and I would like to first and foremost thank both of you, and Dr. Hakim. We will send our thanks to him. We are going to have to wrap up for now. I hope we can carry these discussions with you forward. And I would like to highlight that we're now taking a pause on the learning labs over the summer months, and we will return with new learning labs in September, the 6th iteration. That will be on the 24th of September. And in the meantime, the team will circulate a wrap-up of today's session. So to be mindful of time, I would like to thank our presenters, and I would like to thank our team, and I would first and foremost like to thank everyone who joined in today. Thank you very much. Over and out.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.